Today we're going back to the 17th century to have a look at and study from the works of Peter Paul Rubens. Over the past few months, I've been working on a contemporary twist of his painting, The Consequences of War. But before I delve into the practical aspects of painting a 2-meter canvas, I wanted to give some context. Rubens is well known for his vibrant, crowded, dynamic figurative works, usually depicting characters and narratives ranging from Greek mythology, Christianity, and also the royal and noble subjects he was involved with throughout his life. Presenting his intricate painting plans to his clients on small wooden panels, he would then go on to produce magnificent works at a large scale, involving himself and a numerous amount of assistants. Later on in this video, we're going to take a trip to the Wallace Collection to have a closer look at these smaller works, so stick around. But first, as someone fortunate enough to live in London with access to the National Gallery, seeing his work in the flesh, the busy compositions, vivid colours, and perfectly rendered forms just leave you feeling like you cannot paint. I felt like a candle standing in front of the sun. The Consequences of War. The painting of Rubens I will be transforming into my own contemporary reinterpretation. In this painting, Rubens was responding to 30 years of conflict, and a dark scene is portrayed with several mythological figures intertwined with one another, representing different aspects of war and peace. Mars, symbolizing war, is the center subject and is caught between his lover Venus, attempting to pull him back, and Alecto, dragging him forward towards vengeance and warfare. The painting is also dotted with objects further symbolizing what is lost and damaged during times of war, such as the book underneath the foot of Mars, indicating that the written law, learning, and the arts are all disregarded in such times. As usual, I began with a digital painting playing around with Rubens' composition, colors, adding new abstract shapes and textures into the work. This part of the process will remain hidden for now, as I don't want to completely spoil the final image just yet, but for anyone wondering, I use a mix of digital collage and digital painting on Photoshop to create my reference, and then translate the reference from the digital realm into oil paint. The type of painting I am aiming to produce is a kind of semi-abstract style, where parts of the canvas are rendered realistically in contrast with thick, textured, painterly abstract shapes. I find it quite interesting that the work I end up producing a lot of the time appears to be quite expressive, even spontaneous in a way, but is actually extremely calculated. There are of course many textures and brushstrokes I cannot completely control, but the majority of shapes you see me rendering on the canvas are carefully planned in Photoshop. Sometimes I wonder if working in this manner limits the loose, painterly style I am going for, but as you will see, there are moments where I move away from the digital reference and think of what works as a painting. Two contemporary artists I've looked at whose works involve a type of contemporary reinterpretation are Flora Juchanović and Adrian Ghini. In Juchanović's work, we see her use the language of the Rococo era in her painting, abstracting figures and creating flowing compositions heavy with lush color schemes. As for Ghini, one of his most famous works is a reinterpretation of Van Gogh's Sunflowers. His canvases tower above their viewers, and his control of paint and abstract shapes are inspired by Francis Bacon's famous style that so many are familiar with. We can use his painting of the Pope as another example of reinterpretation. When a contemporary artist looks at reinterpreting a work, they are usually looking at visiting themes or ideas from the original work and questioning or placing them into a modern context. As for my own twist on Rubens' Consequences of War, we could look at it as a response to the utter mess, chaos, and confusion that modern conflict can cause. I usually start my paintings mapping out large spaces of color, trying to think of what kind of tones I need to paint underneath before working any textures or details on top. If anyone is wondering what kind of mediums I use and what my palette looks like, I use a mix of 1 part stand oil and 3 parts linseed oil and mix it with my paint using a palette knife. Throughout earlier stages, I also tend to add liquid and turpentine too, as I want the first layers to dry quickly so I can work on top of them. Towards the end of my painting, I tend to stick with linseed oil to render finer details and gradients. With the first layer complete, I then begin building up the main shapes and tones, starting fairly loosely, building up different brushstrokes and textures with my palette knife in larger areas. At this stage while painting, I don't focus too much on rendering any small details, as I want to see if the painting works as a whole before I move on to refining specific areas. One of the realities planning my paintings digitally is the fact that not everything in the digital plan usually works as a physical painting, so sometimes I make adjustments and changes as I go along with a painting. These can be compositional changes once I experience the reality of the scale of the painting, color changes, and also changes in texture. Before moving on, we're going to take a trip to the Wallace Collection in London, where I sought out Rubens' smaller paintings on panel. These smaller works were actually presented to clients to give an idea of what he would produce before they were refined into the gigantic masterpieces we are all familiar with. The movement, gestural brushstrokes, and pinpoint accuracy of the drawing at this scale is more than enough to make any artist envious. The moment you engage with the surface, the way you sustain connection with it, builds energy, attention, or excitement, and the way you disengage or lift the pen off the page. Of course, it is also quite possible to lift the pen off the page and not lose your sense of connection to its surface. Somehow, one's hand and pen circle around like a swallow above a pond in the evening light, swooping down to the surface time and time again without breaking the momentum of flight. So I went home and did a study of one of Rubens' panels myself, focusing more on capturing the sense of movement in his composition and brushwork, rather than spending hours upon hours crying about how I can't draw like a Flemish master. One thing that I felt like could have improved the study was the ground I chose to work on. Rather than a darker burnt sienna, I should have gone with a lighter yellowy tone to help warm the colours a bit more. Doing this study made me realize how enjoyable working on panel can be. The smooth, non-absorbent surface gives an easy space to make thick, textured brushstrokes. My large painting was now at a stage where I could go in and start refining areas that needed more form and detail. As I did so, I made a big decision regarding the composition and decided that the strange figure jumping into the painting from the back looked odd. So I blended the figure into the sky and looked at some Rococo paintings to get an idea of how I'd like to rework the background. The expanded blue and altered shapes actually reminded me a bit of Hokusai's waves swooping down from above. As for details, some areas needed sharpening up, while others needed to be softened. Here you can see me blending smoother shadows into the arm of a figure, while softening the edges of the shoulder. As for other areas, they were not softened but sharpened, such as the warped face of Venus, no longer the symbol of beauty she once was. Throughout the refining stage, I also kept revisiting the sky and darting around the canvas, making smaller changes attempting to bring together the piece as a whole. I would argue that out of all the stages of painting, towards the end is the most difficult, as I find myself contemplating on what should be reworked, changed, or got rid of altogether, more than actually putting my brush on the canvas itself. And speaking of my brush on the canvas, at this point I am sticking to linseed oil alone. Without stand oil, the paint becomes less viscous, allowing smoother control for finer areas. Only traces of Rubens' mythological figures are left amongst a mass of abstract shapes and fleshy paint. On the left side of the canvas, Venus is stripped of her features and is no longer recognizable as a symbol of beauty, dragged along by what is left of Mars, who is advancing into the darkness. Their backs turn away from the clear blue, hopeful skies in the background, away from the light, away from hope. On the right, a mix of twisted limbs, bodies, and faces fall apart amongst explosive textures, building a chaotic scene. They are already tasting the consequences of what lies in the darkness of war. For those interested in seeing more of my work, you can follow me on Instagram and also take a look at my website. Please do ask questions in the comments below. I'd love to hear what you guys think about this new format for my content, and for anyone interested in further reading, I've put some links in the description. And with that, as always, I wish you all the best, and here is my awkward goodbye.